Thank you so much for joining us here at the Benchmark powered by Blend. We recently started this interview series to share how leaders in financial services and technology face challenges, solve problems, and measure success. The first guest I have today is Patty McCord. Welcome, Patty.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. And you told me you have a quarantini with you today. It's a Friday afternoon.
That's right.
What's in the quarantini?
Mostly vodka.
Mostly vodka, yeah. Getting ready for a good weekend. Just for people who don't know, Patty, my background, she was at Netflix for a number of years. Actually, Patty, why don't you give a brief overview of your background for the group here?
Let's see. I started out in HR as a recruiter. It's an important thing to know because it's kind of shaped the way I think about people. I worked at a bunch of tech companies in the Valley, and I worked for Reed Hastings at a tech company that he had, a software company. And then we sold that company, and he called me to join him at Netflix. So I was there for 14 years with him, kind of developing that crazy culture that ended up to be the culture deck.
Just a little background on Blend. For you, Patty, and you have some background, as you know, we're a software company in the financial services space that's been helping make the process of getting loans and deposit accounts and getting financial products in general simpler and more transparent for consumers. And one of the things I was reading about was transparency. And this is something that we struggle with where we have so many more people in the company now and so many different parts of the company that all are working in lockstep to get things done. But then it becomes really hard to keep all those teams in the loop and all the things that are going in adjacent areas that have relevance to them, but are not important for them to have necessarily input into. And so one of the debates I was having the other day was this kind of default private invite only for new projects versus default public opt-in.
Oh, I would opt for transparency 100% of the time. If you're willing to share everything with people, my experience has been that they give it back to you in terms of trust, right? So if I say, this is material non-public information, but I think it's really important that you know it so you can do your job well, please keep it confidential. The more you do that, the more you get people actually doing that, right? Because you say, I'm trusting you with information that's really critical because I think you're a grown-up and I think you'll keep it secret, right? So for years at Netflix, I argued open compensation. I'm just a huge fan of as much information as you can, assuming that the people you're giving it to are responsible adults with integrity.
In some ways, if you're proposing that comp should be public or could be public in a way that's constructive to the organization, does that also mean that performance numbers, like knowing that Patty's a top performer and we value her at the very top end of this band or whatever? I don't know the exact compensation structures you had, but I'm guessing performance is a big part of compensation.
I don't think a numeric application of somebody's performance is very useful to anybody. So actually what I said, so the tenets of the Netflix culture were, we are going to expect high performance from everybody. And period, right? We're not going to bonus you for for a performance bonus. We're just going to assume that everybody's a 9 or a 10 and that and that's who we're going to hire. And if you're not performing at a 9 or 10, something's wrong, right? You're in the wrong job. The company's changed. You've changed what you want to do. Those are all but performance we always assumed was high. And I separated out performance from compensation because in my years in the Bay Area, compensation is market-based, right? It's what somebody else is going to pay you is what you're worth for that particular job. And for each particular company, there's different, weights of worth depending on where you are in the company. If you guys are busy writing software right now, software engineering is probably pretty important to you, and you
Right.
get what you pay for, right? And if you keep somebody who you're going to rate a 3 and pay them at a 3, you're going to get performance at a 3.
And if the organization undervalues you, then there's a problem with either your manager or you or something that you're working on.
Something that you're working on. But here's a really, really important thing, Nima. Whatever compensation methodology you decide to use, be explicitly clear about how it works. I mean, I cannot tell you how many senior people I talk to. I'm like, you know how comp works, right? Like they take a survey that's based on stuff from last year where they match up companies, they create these ranges. I mean, when I wrote my book, my editor was, had years of experience in publishing. She was like, get out. She's 40 years old. She didn't know how it worked. So whatever it is you do, and if you're explaining it to people and they're looking at you like, does this make any sense at all? Then it may not.
I think it does seem like a relatively obvious thing in some ways that, yeah, of course, if you hire smart people, give them the reins and let them go run with it. But it seems like organizations are especially bad at it, at least the ones that I have worked in, including, I think there's aspects of Blend where I look at that and I'm like, wow, we could probably do a better job of empowering those. And then, there's other people who are really smart and principled who have, I don't know if there's a different point of view or maybe a slightly alternate point of view or unrelated, but maybe similar point of view, where like Ray Dalio says, don't pick your battles, fight them all.
Right. Well, you just said my least favorite word. You don't empower people. They have power. You give them the room to exercise it. And I talk a lot to younger companies about strategy and say, strategy isn't what you're going to do. That's your plan. Strategy is what you choose not to do. And so what I mean is setting very precise context for people about what success looks like with a time frame attached to it. The more you share context, the more you can have everybody in your company. I mean, literally, you should be able to go to anybody and go, top 5 things we're working on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they should be able to name them. And if they can't, I mean, literally everybody, if they can't, then you got some work to do.
I'm going to stop using that word empower people.
Thank you.
Not using that. That'll be one of my takeaways from today's talk.
It's kind of the essence of my whole thing, my whole philosophy is I like to think about culture and leadership like a product, right? Like you think about your product, which is, what you're trying to do at Blend is not like, oh, let's take loans and make them a smidge better, right? You're like, let's change this whole concept, right? Let's really think about it, change the whole concept, make it easier for everybody. And that's what I want you to do and think about with the culture and the way you lead and the way people are working every day. So here's a couple of tips for you. I like tips. When somebody is complaining about a decision that was made that they didn't like, this can help you with the peanut gallery stuff. You want to say, wow, that's really interesting perspective. I want to ask you 2 questions, and the second one's more important. First of all, if you were in management making this decision, which decision would you make? How would you have decided it? More importantly, question 2 is, what information would you want to have to make a good decision? Right? So you're teaching people that you're going to ask them about how they think about it. Another tip is to say, wow, that's really interesting, your perspective. What leads you to believe that's true? Right? What are your facts? What's your data? What's your information? And when you always ask questions in that way, then people are going to know, if I open my mouth, and complain about something, I better have thought it through and have a solution. So, problem finders are useless, right? Problem solvers, weight in gold. When you make a mistake, it's not just important that you stand in front of the company and say, oh, humble me, I made an error. It's really important that you follow it up by going, we made the wrong decision. And here's the information we had when we made the decision. And here's what we know now.
Especially for companies that are moving fast, like Blend and like a lot of other companies. When you're moving fast, you are making decisions with incomplete information. Like by definition, we have to make decisions with incomplete information. And so that will necessitate that we make some mistakes along the way.
Yeah.
And also, it'll also make it so we make the wrong decision, but it might work out of sheer luck. And just because circumstance was better than we thought, or we should have thought.
Yeah. Oh, this gives me a chance to give you my favorite Pattyisms. One of them is have an opinion, take a stand, and be right most of the time.
I think at least the latest Netflix culture doc says is context over process. Uh-huh. And so I want to separate out adult behavior from a lot of process, because I think, one thing that I've been thinking about recently about Blend is the more grown up we get, the more process creep I start to see.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is it's a reaction to, well, this is something that we're doing that we can't necessarily trust the people in the future to do this thing the right way. And therefore we have to put some process in front of it. But I'm curious, like, where you draw the line between like, this is good because it's going to instill best practice, and this is going to slow down the organization over time as we have change.
Some of it's just nomenclature. Some of it's just the words that you use, right? So words like discipline and words like accountability and reliability and deliverables, right? These are all words that are better than process and guidelines and bureaucracy, because, or humans, we organize for efficiency, right? Most people think companies organize for control, which is kind of the old model, right? So all of a sudden you're going to have this big triangular org chart, and there's the people at the top and the people at the middle and the people at the bottom. And I used to say about org charts like that is that, you realize that just by the math, most people see them like mobiles, lying on their back in a strong wind. I don't know. There's somebody up there that reports to somebody. I don't really know. So it's more about that understanding that it's all about collaboration, I think. So just think about the words that you use when you do that, because software engineering is a process, and there's a perfectly reasonable one.
Yep. I think it does go back to letting people make some mistakes, because we can catch them afterwards and fix them.
Yeah. And the important part about when you catch them afterwards and fix them is to fix the context. Why did this smart person make this decision?
Right. I love that you say fix the context, because almost everybody else I talk to, when they ask them that question, they say, well, let's add a new step to the process, if you will. Like they'll say something like that, that'll be like, well, we'll make sure their manager or their manager's manager will approve it before they sign off on it. And so it's funny. I just love that phrasing. I've never heard that before.
I remember working with somebody at another company who had a bunch of interns, and he said, they're all over the map. I want them to think out of the box, but I don't want them to like run ragged, right? Run all over the company, make all these stupid ideas. And I'm like, well, they can't think out of the box until you give them a box.
Right.
And so earlier in your career, your parameters are important because you want to excel within that parameter, right? And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger as your company gets bigger. But I would say that for me, the two critical things I look for when I interview people is judgment, right? Would I trust this person to make the right call with maybe not all the information, right? Or if I trust them to make the call and they didn't have enough information, are they the kind of person that's going to go seek it before they make the right call, right? So judgment is, for me, the number one thing. And the other one is, being reliable.
So I'm curious, like, what's something that you really strongly believed, it's called 10 years ago, that you don't believe anymore today, or something really strongly believed today that you just didn't have a view on 10 years ago?
I think the most important thing we should be learning right now is to pay attention to what we're learning right now and realize that we're building a muscle in every single company in America for change. And that's, in my fantasy world, it's that, the people, you would have groups of people who say, everything's going to be different. Great. Right. Or everything's different. And I'm not sure that's for me. I'm going to go somewhere else. I talked to a group last year of 1,000 CEOs in Canada, and 1,000. I said, raise your hand if you're in the job that you had when you graduated from university. 0 hands went up.
Right.
And I said, raise your hand if the number one metric that you pay attention to and, for the people in your organization is retention. They all raise their hand. I'm like, does it seem weird to you? Does it seem a little cynical? So, now is a time that it's really important to realize that we can change very rapidly and adapt very rapidly, and to remember what we're doing now, to really write it down every day. And so the next time somebody says, we need a process, remember now.
Well, Patty, thank you so much. I really appreciate you spending the last hour with me. Until next time on The Benchmark, be sure to tune into our YouTube channel, everyone who's watching, to see what Welcome to the Bench next time. Patty, I might just go and have one of those quarantinis now. And I urge you to try this in the spirit of trying new things. I urge you to try this.
I will. And because the cow's really cute on there.